what's left of the ceasefire in Syria. Aid convoys have been suspended after an attack on 31 lorries near Aleppo on Monday. Both Russia and Syria have insisted they weren't responsible. Our correspondent James Robbins is at the UN in New York. You may find some of the images in his report distressing.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
Aid for Syria's most desperate attacked and destroyed. Aid workers and truck drivers killed. If the ceasefire wasn't already dead, it's hard to see it surviving this. Vital UN supplies for 78,000 people deliberately targeted. Witnesses say it was an attack from the air.
This is the warehouse of the Syrian Christians. Abroad this house were more than 20 vehicles, 20 trucks full of food and flour and medicine and pampers and blankets. See, the UN Refugee Agency. This is full of blankets from the Refugee Agency.
The United Nations is outraged, ordering the suspension of all convoys to protect aid workers, pointing out that only Syrian government forces and their Russian backers had the means and motive to destroy humanitarian aid for civilians in rebel-held areas. But Moscow and Damascus deny any involvement, hinting the fires here mysteriously started as opposition forces mounted attacks elsewhere.
It's sickening, it's disgusting, and if it is proved to be deliberate, it would amount to a war crime. Our hearts go out to those who've lost lives. They were the selfless people bravely trying to get aid into people who so desperately needed it in eastern Aleppo. And there are many injured, and the warehouses are destroyed.
The ceasefire looks completely finished. Syrian forces declared it so, resuming the bombardment of Aleppo, but all sides have breached the ceasefire, and the Russians stress the accidental US bombing of Syrian troops played its part too. Seen from the perspective of the United Nations here in New York, dedicated to peace, any sort of ceasefire, however fragile, must be better than all-out war. But to fighters on the ground, it can look very different. The rebel side fears a peace settlement could strip them of all their gains. President Assad and his Russian backers still believe they can retake the entire country. Still, the United States hopes to salvage something. But watch John Kerry and the UN Syria envoy and look at today's cold distance between them and Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. In this diplomatic turmoil, the UN Secretary-General was unusually blunt, using his final speech to accuse Syria's government of the greatest war crimes of a very dirty war.
There is no military solution. Many groups have killed many innocents, but none more so than the government of Syria.
The destruction of the aid convoy, the killing of aid workers, whoever was responsible, symbolises a war in Syria which looks, for now, unstoppable.
James Robbins reporting there. Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, is at the United Nations. Lise, the refugee crisis, a key focal point of the talks today.
Well, yes, indeed. If, as James Robbins just said, the Syrian war is unstoppable, then the flow of Syrians fleeing for their lives from Syria will also be unstoppable. In Europe, of course, they've seen that with more than 1 million crossing the Mediterranean last year and hundreds of thousands already crossing this year. President Barack Obama has always said, even though America is an ocean away, they still want to play their role. And in about an hour's time, his Leaders Summit on Refugees is about to begin, co-hosted with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other leaders. And we are expecting to hear new announcements. Well, the person who knows what they will be is Anne Richard, who is the Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees and Immigration, and a very important meeting today. What are we expecting to hear in terms of new commitments, if there are new commitments?
Well, governments can only attend if they commit to do more this year. Anything they've committed over the course of 2016 counts towards an invitation to the summit, but there is no free ticket to get in. And so you will be hearing from 49 governments today, this afternoon, the Secretary General of the UN and the President of the World Bank, talking about what additional things they will do. We also will be hearing commitments from non-governmental organizations, $1.5 billion in the next few years towards helping refugees.
Where out in the region?
Around the world. And the private sector also will be stepping forward today. But this afternoon's focus is on the governments, and it'll be a combination of governments that can give money and take refugees for resettlement, and then some governments that have hosted refugees for years agreeing to adopt policies to get more kids in school, to allow refugees to work, and also to give refugees a firmer legal status.
And that's, of course, is about the global refugee crisis. So many countries now where people are fleeing. Will the Syrian refugee crisis occupy an important place?
Much of what's being committed today got its start in February at an important conference that the British, the Germans, and others hosted in London in order to do more for Syria. So anything pledged there counts for today as well. But what we've tried to do in the intervening months is to raise awareness of how this global crisis affects other countries and how these other countries also need help.
Charity begins at home. The United States has taken in a bit more than 10,000 Syrian refugees. There are some people in the United States say you could take up to 100,000.
The goals for this year were 85,000 refugees from around the world, 10,000 Syrians. We have surpassed 10,000 Syrians. We'll bring perhaps 13,000 here by the end of our fiscal year in a couple weeks. And then we will also be on target to bring 85,000 refugees. What has happened in the past week is we've announced that we want to bring even more next year. 110,000 is the new target, which is quite an increase from 70,000 of the last 3 years.
Well, we'll wait to hear what comes out of that, what positive commitments come out of that summit. And Richard, thank you very much for joining here. I know you've got to go to that meeting. Refugees is on the agenda here today, and one of the issues is that Canada is here saying that it has a model that works in getting individual citizens to group together to sponsor refugees. A private engagement which, when matched with a government policy, can make a lot of difference. Well, we've been to Toronto to see how that model works in practice.
QRSTUV.
After just 9 months in Canada, Remus and Aya know their alphabet and a lot more.
This is almost look like Canada.
Like thousands of Syrians, this family is sponsored by individuals like Claudia. They club together to respond to Syria's refugee crisis.
So what other question words do you use?
Her husband Andrew, an art dealer, helps 3 generations of the Abdullah family with their English.
What time is it?
And helps them settle in.
It's the best way to integrate newcomers into the country, to get them connected with the city, all the things that are available, and to create that warm arrival that sets the tone for the rest of their lives in Canada.
Syrian music at a picnic in the park.
G1? No.
And a warm welcome from more of the family's Canadian sponsors.
Where's Tata?
Their group raised enough money to support the Abdullahs for a year. Everyone at this gathering is doing something similar. You do hear critical voices, but for now, the public mood is largely positive. It's so striking just how different the mood is here compared to much of Europe. But then much about Canada is different. Every Syrian family here was carefully vetted, then welcomed by Canadian families. And there haven't been the kind of attacks here which have created such fear across Europe. But still, when you see this, you have to ask, could this kind of model be adopted somewhere else? Then suddenly, in this crowd, a family I know from Syria. It's been more than 2 years. Their lives were so desperate then. Little Dodd lived in fear. She told me in her dreams she would go back to her old house and see the ghosts of her friends, see people with their heads cut off. Now her nightmare is over.
Every night I see like tomorrow I will go play, tomorrow I have school, tomorrow everything. Like I forget the nightmares and and now everything is happy now.
Canada's Prime Minister wins applause for his refugee policy. London Mayor Sadiq Khan is the latest to come calling. Does Canada's response to the refugee crisis have any lessons for the rest of the world?
We know that differences are a source of strength, and that's something that we have to continue to demonstrate. It means better jobs, better outcomes for our entire communities.
I can write from 1 to 100.
These Syrians already feel they belong here. This vast country has long made space for new citizens. But like many other places, it's asking, how many more will it make room for? How long will this warm welcome last? Lise Doucette, BBC News, Toronto. So there's a different example of how refugees are being welcomed in Canada. And as we made clear in our report, the situation in Canada is different. They're an ocean away from the Mediterranean. And the Canadian government has been screening refugees in the camps in Jordan, also in Lebanon, and making sure that there's not any possibility of the kind of attacks that we've seen in Europe and has caused such fear and poisoned the atmosphere when it comes to refugees. But it's an interesting model, and we'll see. Britain has already also introduced what they call a community sponsorship model through the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and some other countries. We were told by the Canadian Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship told us that 12 countries have shown interest. So we'll see whether or not that gains some traction, and certainly will be part of the discussions that will take place just behind us here at the UN, in the UN headquarters, when this Leaders Summit, which is about 3 hours long, gets with people getting together to just what to do about this humanitarian crisis of our time. And refugees is so much a big part of it. Not just from Syria, of course, but Syrians make up the largest number fleeing, and we understand why.
Well, a remarkable reunion there. Thanks very much, Lise Doucette. Well, one of the pressure points in this crisis is the Greek island of Lesbos, a place where many migrants first arrive in Europe. And the situation there right now is tense. 9 migrants were arrested when a fire broke out at a refugee camp on the island. More than 4,000 people had to be evacuated from the Moira camp. The Greek government says it's sending a ship to provide temporary accommodation, and additional riot police are also being sent. Our correspondent Mark Lowen's on Lesbos and has this report.
The fire broke out in the centre of the Moria migrant camp. You can still see some of the blackened trees and signs of the blaze, although a lot of the damage has already been cleared up. Many of the refugees and the residents have already returned here, but some of them talk about how their documents and personal possessions were damaged in the blaze. They say that there was fighting here on Monday and into Monday night, and then different communities blame each other for starting the blaze. But what it comes down to really is it's the culmination of anger, of rage, of despair by many people who have been stuck here. Some of their applications for asylum have taken months to process. They feel cooped up here and without any prospects at all. And they say that they're lacking support from the Greek government as they're held here in a sort of no man's land. But there's also anger in some communities here on the island of Lesbos. There's frustration that the migrant crisis is continuing here. Some far-right groups are exploiting the situation to try to increase the kind of tensions as well. The fear is that as the doors to the Balkans remain closed and the deal to resettle migrants into Turkey appears on the verge of collapse, well then the numbers of new arrivals here in Lesbos and on other Greek islands as well could start to accelerate. Europe's migrant crisis shows no sign of going away.
Now let's take a look at some of the day's other news. The father of Ahmed Khan Rahami, the suspect in the New York and New Jersey bombings, reportedly told police his son was a terrorist 2 years ago. The New York Times says Mohammed Rahami contacted the FBI after his son was involved in a violent domestic dispute. The FBI looked into the matter, but Mr. Rahami later withdrew his comments. A court in Finland found 5 members of Cuba's national volleyball team guilty of aggravated rape. The victim was a Finnish woman. The men were given prison sentences of up to 5 years. A 6th member of the team was acquitted. The crime took place at a hotel during the World Volleyball League event in July. A French parliamentary inquiry's recommended installing security cameras in all slaughterhouses to prevent cruelty. The panel also called on abattoirs to devise a way of stunning animals before slaughter that would be acceptable to the Muslim and Jewish communities. Brangelina, it seems, is no more. The Hollywood power couple, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, are set to divorce, with her lawyer saying that she initiated the action. Reports from here in the United States say Jolie filed the divorce papers on Monday, citing irreconcilable differences. They've been together for 12 years and have 6 children. The BBC's James Cook reports from Los Angeles.
In a town full of golden couples, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt shone the brightest of them all. Beautiful superstar actors epitomising the Hollywood dream. Her lawyer has released a statement saying the divorce was made for the health of the family.
They were the biggest couple in celebrity. They were just huge, on a whole different scale to any other celebrity we've seen. So this is a big story, and of course, because of the divorce, it's going to get bigger.
And maybe life is imitating art. Last year, the two played a couple whose relationship was on the rocks.
I think it's a reality of marriage that you go through hard times and that you have to embrace those hard times and those challenges and know that that's a part of your marriage, and it's the pulling through together that actually makes the bond.
They were together for more than a decade, married for 2 years and have 6 children, 3 of whom were adopted internationally. But they often trod different paths. As a goodwill ambassador for the United Nations, Angelina became an outspoken voice for the downtrodden, campaigning to help refugees and promoting breast cancer awareness after undergoing a double mastectomy. In a town obsessed with celebrity, this is big, big news. And it's not just here. Around the world, millions of people are discussing this divorce. But why the fascination?
I just find Angelina very, very gorgeous, and Brad Pitt as well. I thought they made a great couple. So I'm sure they have their own, reasons why they're doing this.
People look at them and they think they have everything, you know what I mean? And they think, like, how could they possibly have a problem? They got looks, they got money, they got love, they got everything, right?
I've seen a few celebrities here in Hollywood, and they're just normal people. They're just like us, and they go through their own struggles and, their own happiness, and people should just, be more concerned about their own lives.
In Hollywood, the rumours swirl as rumours do. Claims of an affair, substance abuse, fights about the children. But only 2 people really know why Brangelina are no more. James Cook, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Another Hollywood romance bites the dust. Now, in case you're counting, there are now less than 50 days to go until US Election Day. Most of the focus so far has been on Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, 2 candidates who have divided opinion across the country. But of course, it's not just about personalities, but issues. All this week, a BBC team is taking a train trip across several American states to hear people's concerns. After stopping in Minneapolis, our correspondent Aleem Maqbool headed to Fargo in North Dakota, and that's where he's been speaking to people about abortion, an issue which both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have very different views on.
We're here in Fargo to talk about what continues to be an incredibly contentious topic, one where it doesn't just matter who's in the White House, but who they then choose to serve in the Supreme Court to make the laws, and that's abortion.
Once a week, the day abortions happen, protesters gather outside this clinic, the only abortion clinic in the state of North Dakota.
This is a civil rights issue of our day because it has to do with the death of innocent human persons that's legal here in our country.
All of the other liberties that we have in life, all of the other things mean nothing to a dead person, do they?
Every time one of the patients turned up, the anti-abortion protesters followed and intimidated her, making comments along the way.
It's hard because by the time they get here, their minds are pretty much made up, so it's kind of a last-ditch effort. But if maybe we can even, offer them a kind word or a smile or just the offer to pray for them.
Those in the blue vests are volunteers who come out to protect the patients from harassment.
I was going to ask how you like yours.
The surgeries come at risk of closure from local politicians, though that threat's been averted for now. But when the political risk to abortion clinics recedes locally and nationally, anti-abortionists resort to other measures.
The protester activity has really stepped up in the last few years, really since Obama became president. There's more intimidation, harassment at clinics. And so the violence level has amped up.
Some advocates for a woman's right to choose whether they have an abortion, like Tammy, say the levels of provision and the number of clinics now are greatly inadequate.
North Dakota only has one clinic. We're located on the far eastern border of North Dakota, but we also serve a tri-state area. We serve North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, and northwestern Minnesota.
And those kinds of distances are already stopping some from coming here, but that doesn't mean they're not having abortions.
If a person doesn't want to give birth, they're not gonna. And there's ways, just Google it. I mean, there's the obvious, like what they did in the 80s with coat hangers or pens and stuff.
Do you know of others who've had abortions that way, not in safe clinics?
Yeah.
Given the differences between the two candidates, abortion's one of those topics where the choice America makes in November could have a profound impact. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Fargo, North Dakota.
And you can find out more about Aleem's train trip across the northern United States on our website. Just go to bbc.com/news, and tomorrow Aleem will be in Montana as the team tries to reach one of America's decreasing numbers of glaciers. Well, he might be an heir to the British throne, but for now Prince William has a job working as an air ambulance pilot in the east of England. He's been speaking to the BBC about his role. He said there were some sad, dark moments, but that he loved working with his team. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has more.
His role is to serve, eventually as king. But for now, the role William appears to relish most is the one he chose for himself, piloting a helicopter for the East Anglian Air Ambulance.
I love working in a team, and that's something that my other job doesn't necessarily do. I'm sort of, you're more out there on your own a little bit. When I put my air ambulance hat on and I come here and I fly, I'm one of the team. I want to get the job done, and at the end of the day feel like I've made a difference and a contribution.
It's more than a year now since William joined the air ambulance team. There have been scores of call-outs to accidents and emergencies, and to scenes which have often been distressing.
There are some very sad, dark moments, and we talk about it a lot, but it's hard. You try not to take it away from you, but it can be quite difficult.
But for all the sad moments, there's also the satisfaction of working as part of a team which is saving life.
The one job that I feel the most proud about, that we made the most difference, was probably a job very early on, actually, when I first started. We immediately realised it was a very serious crash from overhead. The two occupants of the van, uncle and nephew, and very sadly the uncle didn't make it, but the nephew did. He was very badly injured.
I think I broke every bone in my body, pretty much. My legs were like shattered, so they put all metal rods down them, and then I had to learn to walk again. I'm really grateful for getting me through it, getting me out so fast, and just being there.
Having seen how bad he was and seeing where he is now, that does make you realise that this and the stuff that the team do is really crucial.
He is William Wales, the pilot prince, augmenting his special birthright with the added validity of a job, focused on the challenges and comfortable with the camaraderie and the banter.
When I first got here, it was very polite. It's now got a lot worse. As they got to know me, and they've got the inhibitions have gone. I've got worse nicknames. They've gone up the ladder.
If I wasn't doing this job, what would I be doing?
I think mine's fairly obvious.
Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
A reminder of our main news. The United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has blamed the Syrian government for the majority of civilian deaths during the country's 5-year civil war. His stinging criticism at the opening of the UN General Assembly came after the UN was forced to suspend aid deliveries following Monday's airstrike on a humanitarian convoy. The Russian Defense Ministry says that neither Russian nor Syrian aircraft were involved, a denial echoed by the Syrian military. Well, that's all we have from the programme. Next, we have the weather. But for now, from me, Regina Vaidyanathan, and the rest of the team, goodbye.